Well, welcome to Health Informatics for Nursing Leadership, uh, September 2020, Lecture 1. Thanks for having me. As I said in my introduction, it's a privilege to be here. But I'm not here because we've solved all the problems facing informatics in the United States, and especially here in Texas. We have a great many areas for improvement, and certainly we've learned some valuable but painful lessons managing the pandemic. We've had coding errors and system failures, and it has slowed us down and allowed the virus to spread when it could have been prevented. And so we are very much aware of our challenges ahead. So it makes this opportunity to think deeply about informatics for me a valuable one, and I hope it will be for you as well. We've got 4 classes that we'll have together, and we'll briefly just review those so you'll know what's coming up. In this one, we're going to talk about healthcare informatics in Lithuania, both past, present, and future. We'll talk about those essential competencies that you will need as a healthcare leader, in particular around informatics. And we'll talk about planning, implementing, and evaluating informatics. Those are very difficult challenges in any setting, but around informatics, there's some special challenges. In the second lecture, we're going to talk about using health informatics to improve quality, and that will get us into quality improvement initiatives and what those entail. And then the role of the electronic health record in all of this is going to be covered in our next time together. The third time we're together, we're going to talk about evaluating mHealth, and mHealth is mobile health devices. And those are costly and yet have a lot of promise for quality outcomes. So we need to become real familiar with those. In the fourth class, it's really going to be a hands-on activity in a computer classroom, and we're going to learn how to use some data analysis and identification tools. And those will help as we apply informatics to the population health, not just to the work we do in our local agencies and hospitals, but also statewide or countrywide. And I'll start by saying that a challenge for me was preparing my remarks without ever having met you. And I have a feeling that there may be some things that I will think are important about informatics, but I may have left some things out that you think are important and that should be covered. So I've asked that you go to Moodle to where this slides and resources are located for these classes, and answer a few simple questions about what might be missing. Is there something that you really have a burning desire to hear more about related to informatics? And then also tell me if there are some things that I brought up, like planning and evaluating healthcare, that you think maybe we could cut back some time on that and add some of those things that you would rather hear about. So don't be shy about telling me what you're interested in. If you would tell me those things within the next 24 hours, so I might have a little bit of time to cover some of those. But I'm serious about wanting this to be a joint effort, and if there's anything that I can improve or include, let me know. All right, so let's start right off the bat with Lecture 1, and health informatics in Lithuania, past, present, and future. But even before we can do that, let's just put the groundwork down to give some common understanding of some terms you're going to be hearing. Digital health, that's really basically anything that has to do with a computer being involved or the internet being involved with healthcare. Informatics, here's one definition, there are thousands. The representation, processing, and communicating of information in natural and engineered systems. E-health just means electronic settings or context or tools for public health or individual health. And it involves business and health services and information sciences. And ImHealth, on the other hand, is anything that is a mobile device. It isn't wired directly, but is wireless technology that will support healthcare delivery or healthcare outcomes. ICT stands for Information, Communication, and Technology. HIT, Health Information Technology. Now, I should have said earlier, these slides are available. You don't need to be taking these down verbatim right now. They'll be yours for you to go over as often as you like. Now, there's a subtle difference between electronic medical records and electronic health records. And that difference really has to do with the scope of the information. Electronic medical records usually are confined and are used within particular agencies or organizations. Electronic health records, on the other hand, is a term that's usually used when that information that is stored in those records is accessible through some portal to the patient, to the provider, to other institutions and other providers. So it is more accessible than electronic medical record is. Early on, we probably relied on the term electronic medical record, where nowadays it's not enough to have your own medical record electronically stored. It's really more beneficial to have your record be available to all those, including yourself, who are using or involved in your health. So that subtle difference, but it's an important one. Now, I want to go back in the history just a little bit and tell you about a report that came out, I think around 2016, let's see if I have it here, 2006. It's sort of an inventory of what was going on in Europe around e-health. And Lithuania, of course, is highlighted in that report. So let's see what was going on in Lithuania in 2006. It was in the middle of a far-reaching process of developing an e-health system and structures, but that also was going to require a transforming of the whole national health system in general. So it was a huge endeavor, but it was certainly getting started strongly by 2006. They were paying special attention at that time to infrastructure development. And they encountered many challenges in the areas of the development and deployment. There were technical challenges, financial challenges, and even legal obstacles that had to be overcome. They said, though, that in the future, there would probably be a shift away from those technical and legal challenges to more organizational and financial ones. I thought that was very far-sighted of them. Now, there was also in that report a sort of list of things that were essential for any electronic medical system. And I have highlighted those 6 factors here because they are so true and so wise. There has to be a commitment and involvement of all stakeholders, from the people who are going to use the system, the citizens and patients, to people who are going to provide care, to the industry itself, to legal authorities and third-party payers. Whoever's paying for the service is certainly a stakeholder in the kind of e-health system that is going to be developed in Lithuania or anywhere else in the world. The second thing is strong health policy and clinical leadership. And it has to be flexible and regularly reviewed. That means you can't put a system in place and walk away and think that it's going to be there and be useful 5 years from now. It has to be continuously evaluated. The third thing would be regular assessment of the cost and incentives of any kind of infrastructure or system you put in place. um, as you're going to see in just a little while how costly a system like this can be, it needs to be producing the maximum output that you desire for that huge investment. So that has to be regularly assessed. The fourth thing, there's going to have to be changes in organizational and work practices. We can't include informatics in our settings of delivery of care without changing the delivery of care processes. So it's not possible to overstate how much informatics has changed what happens at the bedside, what happens in the boardroom. It is a massive change to the way we look at the way healthcare is delivered. The fifth thing, there needs to be strong leadership clinically, and that's where you come in. Your positions as nursing leaders are going to be called upon to help implement change, and it's essential that you be knowledgeable about what kind of change is needed and then how to evaluate the change that's put in place. And finally, there needs to be a long-term perspective. In other words, as I said before, you don't put something in place and think it stays there for 5 or 10 years. You have to be looking at where do we want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because what we put in place today may not be relevant then. So you need endurance to be flexible, as we said earlier, and you need patience. The patience to, as they say here, beneficial e-health investments like good wine. It takes a considerable amount of time to mature and develop its potential fully. So I just thought those were interesting and wise observations by the people preparing the report in 2006. They knew what they were talking about. Now, this is just an example of some data that on Lithuanian health and health context. And I think something appeared to happen in 2009. If you'll notice, to the right of 2009 are earlier years, and to the left of 2009, more current years. And there was certainly a few more things that you all were collecting data about after 2009. Now, I think it's also good to point out that there were things that you had been collecting over time that apparently were important health issues that warranted gathering data and reporting it. And the first one was prevalence of HIV, and the second, adolescent birth rate. So I think there's a saying that what we measure is important, and what is important we measure. So some of the things that you started to measure after 2009 were the number of nursing and midwifery personnel, and the density of those personnel per population. And interestingly, in regard to health delivery, the number of cellular phone subscribers had increased over time from 2010 to 2012. So I think something, as I said, appeared to be happening in 2009. Now, here was a sort of inventory in that report about what was already in place for Lithuania at that time. And it's very dense, and I certainly don't expect you to read every word of this, but I've put 2 red arrows here that are things that were not in place, but that were being would be necessary for an e-health system to function in Lithuania. A national policy on health technology was not yet in place at that time, but you did have a regulatory agency responsible for implementing and enforcing regulations. You had a health technology assessment unit. You had a health technology management unit. You had however, no medical device nomenclature system. In other words, one of the things you're going to know by the time we finish talking is that in informatics, we are required to have common language and common names for things, because as things are turned in, as data or things that are happening are turned into information that needs to be shared, that information has to be understandable across a great many platforms. So there needs to be standardization of terms, and you'll learn a lot more about that as we go along. But there was at that time of this report no medical device system that named everything in the same way. Now let's look at the next page, which is the finishing of this report. There was some gaps in your inventory and maintenance systems of information. At the national level, you had medical equipment management, standardized inventories going on. But at the regional and hospital level, those were incomplete. And you had no standardized management software of these maintenance and inventory. Now, that sort of sounds obscure, but it certainly did hit us in the United States when we needed to know where were the ventilators and where were the people who needed them. And we needed to be able to access that information efficiently, quickly, and in real time. And we learned that our infrastructure for informatics was not adequate for doing that. We got our act together finally, but it took quite some time because in the United States, we have states that are quite huge, and our population in Texas, for example, is over 20 million people. So each governor of each state might have known where the ventilators, there might have been a system where they knew within the state what we had, but we certainly didn't know across the country, and we learned how important it was to know where your inventory was for addressing crisis like a pandemic, or in our case, we had a recent bout of hurricanes. And so those kinds of information are very, very valuable. So pretty much by far, you had the majority of these things already in place, but you still had some things that you were working on, and certainly we do as well. Now, there was another report that came out in 2017, and it was by someone whose name you may know. He had been with the Ministry of Health of Lithuania, but he had also been a faculty at the Kaunas University of Medicine. And he had written a report that was the overview of e-health in Lithuania in 2017. So we're coming forward in time a little bit. And it was the aim of this endeavor and in e-health in general to accomplish this. I'll let you read it. Basically, what was required was a transparent and effective healthcare system with accessible and high quality healthcare services and necessary information exchange using the high-tech, most interoperable information and communication technologies. And I use the word interoperable. Let me define that. That means that what I know and collecting in my data is understandable by you, and my system can talk to your system. And that is critical in a comprehensive system of healthcare. Now, here were the priorities. Take a minute and you want to review those priorities. And these were priorities in Lithuania in 2017. And I'll just highlight the last one. The need to create conditions for efficient, high quality, accessible health services via continuous information gathering, data exchange, and interoperability and security of information. So all of those are lofty goals and principles, but very complex and challenging to create. Now, over time, there's been legislation in your country that would support e-health, and here's some legislation listed. You will certainly know more about these than I do, but it is impressive to see that things were changing and moving forward. And look at the first one. There was an e-health system development program that was initiated in 2009. And that might account for the fact that in that previous slide, we saw that after 2009, there was an uptick in the data that was being reported from Lithuania on things like cellular use and let's see, workforce, nursing workforce was, those reports were coming out after 2009. Now, in 2017, when this report was on eHealth was created, there were 29 programs, and here they are listed. Hospital information, there were 20 hospitals that were part of the hospital information system. There was a register for medications, for specialists, for institutional licensing. There was a telecardiology program in place, National Physician Support System. And here's something odd looking, SNOMED CT, and we'll learn more about that. As I said, we are required in informatics to use a consistent language when we're speaking to systems across institutions. SNOMED is one of those languages, and nursing is translating what we do into the language that SNOMED understands, and that then is understood by anybody else worldwide who uses SNOMED. And SNOMED CT stands for clinical treatments. And then that final one, e-booking for ambulatory consultation, that just means that a consumer has now a portal that in some cases they can go into and schedule their own appointments for consultation. So a lot went on between 2009 and 2015 here in Lithuania. Now, none of this is cheap, as I said earlier. From 2009 to 2015, there were 27.9 million euros spent on an e-health system upgrade. The EU supported 85% of that, and Lithuania's budget was 15%. The maintenance of those system programs and so forth that we mentioned was $6 million per year. So as I said, this is an expensive endeavor. We are expecting to find great benefits from it because we're certainly investing a lot in it. So a graphic from that same report of the healthcare system as it was between 2009 and 2015. You can see all the little parts that have to communicate with each other and understand each other that are involved in an electronic health record, because remember, that's the one that is accessible by a great many services and individuals, providers, patients, and hospitals, and so forth. And I think there's some real challenges, especially around pharmacy and X-ray, because those two groups speak their own language. Some of us have to then have their language interpreted for us. So, for example, imaging, that is data. It is data that is in the form of an image, and so to be transmitted and to be understood is quite challenging, so that the rest of us can understand what's being said and communicated. Now, right now, this is what hospitals have to send to a centralized system of electronic health record. I'll give you a moment to take a look at that list. And the certificates that are also available online are these. And in 2017, again, I will just stress what was in the report, 170 of 500 state healthcare institutions were taking part in the e-health projects. And there was certainly support for those that had not yet done that. And most pharmacies were already integrated into a central system. But the target date was 2018, that then all healthcare institutions would be up and running with e-health solutions by 2018. Now, none of this goes without risks and opportunities. There was certainly institutional resistance. There were competitors, and I'm not really sure what the report meant by competitors, but I know what that would mean in our country. It would mean that there were certainly several high-powered companies competing to get the contracts for an electronic health record, for example. And some institutions went with one company and some went with another, and then those institutions could not communicate with each other. And so there had to be things that were worked out, some negotiating that went on. Negative history means, I would guess, we've tried these kinds of things before, we didn't like them, they didn't work, and so we're resisting the impetus to go forward with something new. And sometimes hospitals didn't manage change all that well. And that certainly happens in our country. And it's another reason that it is so important that nurses as leaders in hospitals need to be well versed in things, ways to address change, how to implement change so that it will be successful. Then there was the standardization issues, and I've already talked about SNOMED, but there's another one, HL7, which is really a way to structure a communication that crosses from one institution to another so that everybody knows where to find information about a particular aspect of care, and that aspect of care is described the same way regardless of what institution the information is coming from. It's critical to make an informatics system work. Then legislation certainly is still needed in Lithuania, or it was in 2017, for more standardization of business documents and so forth. And anytime you have legislation, you need to have the involvement of all the stakeholders, and that is always an opportunity and a challenge. Financing is critical and cannot be entered in lightly because of the scope and the cost of e-health. You have the added challenge here in Lithuania, not only of operating within your own country, but operating across the EU. And I respect and understand how challenging that must be at times. And then you just need IT support. You can't have these systems if you don't have the people skilled in the hardware and the software necessary to make them work on a daily basis. Then the network, the e-health network, your position within your neighbor countries and the exchange of experiences, your integration, exchange of information among EU. There's a goal for that to be up and going and fully operational by this year, 2020. And certainly I would guess the pandemic has highlighted the importance of being able to talk across countries as well. All right, so let's take a breath. We've covered some of your past and present and future challenges. And now it's all about you. We're going to talk about the competencies for healthcare leaders in informatics. The American Nurses Association has identified nursing informatics in this way: a specialty that integrates nursing, science in general, especially computer science and information science, to manage and communicate data, information, and knowledge. And later on, we'll be talking about the difference between data and information and knowledge. They don't all mean the same thing. Basically, as a leader in your country in informatics, you're going to have to be Superman and Superwoman, because the task is a big one. But you can do it. Now, what I'm going to show you next is a video that was really a recruiting video for students at a program in the United States, the University of Minnesota. I'm not recruiting students for them, but I thought they did such a good job with their video that in telling the story of at least one nurse informaticist and what she does. So let's begin with that.
Nursing informatics is really the application of technology and computers within nursing and healthcare. Nurses are at the hub of information management in healthcare. And so now that technology has permeated every aspect of healthcare, nurses have to be at the center of technology in healthcare as well.
I'm Ann LaFlamme, Senior Director of Clinical Informatics for Minnesota Health. I would say nursing informatics is being that liaison between the technology savvy people and the clinician and their workflows. It's also taking the bits and bytes of data that we input into a record or any piece of technology and gathering those and making meaning out of them. I love coming to work because of the variety. I can have my day planned to a T and it will all dissolve in an instant and you'll be going doing something else. And that's fun to me because it keeps you hopping, it keeps you quick on your feet. It allows you to meet all different sorts of people. And that's what the fun of it is doing something different absolutely every day. One thing I'll do is round on units, on inpatient units, on ambulatory units. And so today we rounded on the dialysis unit on the 4th floor of the medical center. And really just talking with nurses, physicians, the techs, the charge nurse, and the manager in that area to understand what are their challenges right now with technology, whether that be with the electronic health record, with their dialysis machines. It could be where's the computer in the room. Is that helping me during my work or hindering me during my work? Seeing something from beginning to end, I think that's one of the most gratifying things when you work really hard to get something going. You have really difficult moments when you just don't know if it's going to happen, if it's going to take, if it's even possible. And then we do something that is amazing. That's what's most gratifying.
I'm Kevin Smith. I'm a nurse practitioner and I'm Chief Clinical Officer at Hypnosis. Technology is not just about some cool widget or some cool tool. It's a way to solve a problem. And one thing that I really like about being involved in informatics, there's really a creativity and an entrepreneurial and an innovative spirit, because it's still a very new field.
Our students from our program are making us extremely proud. We have numerous students who now hold the title of Chief Nursing Informatics Officer at prestigious institutions around the country. We have nurses who are transforming the healthcare landscape within massive companies. We have students who are changing policy. So we have in every forefront students who are transforming healthcare.
I think for any nurse who has an interest in health informatics, that it's an extremely rewarding career path. And there are so many opportunities for improvement in healthcare. Nurses who have worked at the bedside understand patient care, understand some of the challenges in the clinical setting, they're the perfect people to be involved in informatics, because informatics is really about ways that we can use information technology to improve the delivery of healthcare.
I think that video gives you just a tiny flavor of the scope of things that nurse informaticists can do. So, what are their roles and requirements of that position? Let's take a look. In the United States now, I'm speaking now from my point of view, a bachelor's degree in nursing as at the very minimum, a master's degree and certification, particularly for executive roles. For example, to become a chief nurse informatics officer, you'd need at least a master's degree and certification. Of course, the experience and strong understanding of working in a clinical setting, to me, ought to be number one, because if you don't know what work goes on and how people do that work, you cannot understand what a nurse informaticist will be faced with. You have to know from the clinical side and also from the management side what goes on in your setting. Strong technical skills. You have to learn to quickly adapt to anything new, because what we're talking about today will be obsolete probably in just a few years. So you have to constantly be learning about new technologies and innovations. Project management skills. We're going to talk a lot about that tomorrow. Hugely important in how you create a new program, how you manage all of that, and all the intricacies and stakeholders in that program, and how you roll it out and then evaluate it. Central. You can get some technical help, but the skill that is in strong management, project management, it's a very unique skill. You really need to enjoy data, I think. And I hope that's what we can accomplish in that fourth class, is that you can get your feet wet and how to find data and how to realize how much there is available to you that will help you analyze your situation and strategize. Economics. This is hugely important in wherever you are, because regardless of how your healthcare is paid for, it takes money to provide it, and careful stewardship of that money is critical. And as a nurse leader, you'll be a part of that conversation. Interpersonal skills, it's great if you like machines and you like computers and you like data, but those interpersonal skills of getting all people on board to move in the same direction are essential. Leadership experience, you're getting some of great preparation here in this program for that. Now, here are some of the job titles in the US, and they may be different here, but you may see someone called a nurse informaticist or a nursing informatics specialist or a nursing informatics clinician, clinical nurse informatics specialist, perioperative informatics nurse. So, and this is just a sample of the titles that I have seen used. Now, we talked about the competencies, and certainly from interpersonal skills to managing money, but I highlighted how important planning, implementing, and evaluating it, project management basically is in a healthcare setting. So let's start with implementing a project. Planning is the first step, usually in any project. Gathering information, finding out what users really need, looking at financial, both resources and needs, things that the money you have to work with and the money you're going to need to work with at a different scale. And then you start your purchasing process, deciding what to purchase, what kind of software or what kind of equipment that can communicate with electronically with records and so forth. You start to look for the supporting aspects of your environment. That could be people, but it could also be finances. Who to talk to. Communication is a resource itself. Risk management is something that you need to be mindful of in the next stage. Things that like privacy and information security are very, very important with any kind of electronic endeavor. And training, what are your resources for training? Who needs to be trained, who will do that training, and so forth. Then change management is at the implementation phase. We're going to talk a good bit about that in later slides. Training again occurs in the implementation phase. And evaluation, how will your new endeavor be measured? What's going to indicate its performance? What's going to indicate what you hope to achieve as an outcome? Who do you have to report to is important. How are you going to go about doing your evaluation? Is it going to be record review? Is it going to be generating reports from the electronic health record? Is it going to be interviews? How are you going to keep this project going after you've implemented it? Some people have come up with wonderful programs and they worked really, really well. But after a period of time, when the emphasis moved on to other things that had to be done, there was no one to sustain the project. And I've seen some excellent projects just sort of fade away because they didn't have a champion and they didn't have a sustainability plan in place. And then that sort of goes along with the next one, which is operational support. Who's behind this project? And how will it continue? So those are just a few of the things you need to think about. And they look linear here, like you'd plan first and then you'd acquire and then you'd implement and evaluate. But in reality, they go back and forth. From your evaluation, you might find out that you need to go back and change your plan and so forth. So we'll see that later in some other slides. So key tasks are the securing of the support and finding champions. And those need to be among not only the management level, but they need to be among the staff who are going to be using these new systems. Development and implementation, who does what, and we're going to get real specific about that in just a little while. And then building a continuous, flexible, convenient training program. Train, train, train. It is critical to the success of healthcare in general, but also particularly in any kind of new informatics project. Training is key. Now, I've hinted at this earlier, but I want to reinforce the fact that you must know as a nurse leader who's going to be involved in planning and implementing informatics projects, you need to know what users actually do in their work and how they will use the innovation to improve their work. And here's a simple business process flow chart or workflow diagram of just a patient calling. Patient calls, somebody answers the call, you need to know who that is. And let's say they want, you ask if they're calling about getting a medication refilled. And they say no, and then you say, well, is it test results? And let's say now they say yes. And then you have to then take a message and request the information from whatever source, electronic or paper source you have. But let's say that they did want to refill. Then you go to the triage staff, and the triage has to go to documents. So you get some sense of how many people are involved, what they have to do when someone requests information, for example. And now you need to know how whatever your innovation is electronically, how that's going to improve that work. And if it doesn't improve that work, if it simply adds on another layer of work, then it will not succeed. So I cannot stress strongly enough, from the very beginning, it is critical that anybody involved in designing electronic systems needs to be intimately familiar with the flow of work and what people who are actually doing the work need from this new innovation. Oops. So what's going to make you succeed in your efforts? The readiness of the organization, for sure. Are they prepared to understand what the system that they're about to put into place can do? Are they prepared to investigate and choose a system? In other words, remember we said you're going to have to look at acquisition of systems sometimes, sometimes not. Sometimes you may be asked to implement something because it is what your partners in the EU have decided is what you will use. But how it perhaps needs to be personalized and individualized for your own particular needs in your institution or in your country as a whole. Is your organization ready to implement the system? Does it have enough money to do it? Does it have enough personnel and support? Do they have the tech support they need? Is the organization prepared to do the training? Not once, probably not even twice or three times, but every time there's a new employee, every time there's a new change in the system, there needs to be additional training. And so training is one of these things that runs in the background constantly for an organization to be successful. Is your organization prepared to monitor the system across time, to catch situations where the system isn't working, and to catch those early so that it can be modified before people develop workarounds around it that become then part of their workflow? I can't tell you how many times I hear nurses who have figured out ways to work around a system rather than having a system that works for them. It's for a project to be successful, there needs to be a champion. That champion needs not just to be at the management level or the leadership level, but also at the staff level. Without that champion, again, workarounds become the standard for the day, and the system that you've designed so carefully isn't functioning at its best because people aren't using it the way it was designed to be used. Which gets to the next one, the perceived usefulness of the system. Essential from the top management level down to the person who is involved in any way in making that system work. Is there an organizational teamwork in place? For small practice settings, change occurs within the staff rather than from the top. And so the staff need to be involved in any planning, in any evaluation, in any training plans. Everyone who is involved, everyone who is a stakeholder has some input if your project is going to be successful. And then everything sort of sits on top of the people skills. And I'll stress again that they are as important as any technology that you're about to put into place. So now let's get a little more detailed about how one goes about planning and implementing a project. Currently, at least in the United States and other countries that I am aware of, I can't really speak with certainty that this is the same language or the way to describe project management in your country, but I can tell you from the United States perspective what people are saying about project management. There's really two schools of thought. Of course, there's more than two, but let's just overgeneralize and say there are two. There's the waterfall method versus the agile method, and there's schools of thought that one is better than the other. So I'll tell you about both of them. The waterfall method, it's a more linear method, like that first slide I showed where you had the 4 stages and it looked really linear. In the waterfall method, you initiate a project. Somebody says we have a need for something. Excuse me. And so a project is begun. And it starts with planning. And that is a critical, basic beginning point where you get stakeholders involved and people sit and discuss what is needed, what is not working with the current situation, what kinds of tools need to be put in place. And so a great deal of time is done up front planning. And then you've got your plan and it's in place and you're satisfied with it. You execute that plan. And let's say it's a new piece of technology for the ICU. You execute that plan and then you monitor it. And you go back and you see, how does this play out according to what you had planned? And you can tweak your plan and then go down, execute your tweaked plan and see what happens. And so you do some doubling back. But basically, you've put the majority of your effort into your planning situation to start with. And you've become focused on that original plan, and what you're doing is tweaking that plan as you go forward. Now, in opposition or in contrast, I should say, to that strategy, and frankly, it's the one I have been most used to seeing, there is a more agile process, and it is made up of numerous what they call sprints, where you're going to take little bits and pieces of a project process of developing, and you're going to take bite-sized chunks and start to implement change right off the bat. You're spending some time planning, but you're planning what it is you want to check out, what you want to put in place, and just see if this is sort of what your user is expecting, what they think will fit into their process. Let me just give you a quick example of what some people have said about the agile process. Let's say you wanted to build a hamburger. So you would take some people and you would say, here's a hamburger that I think it's got meat and it's got bread. What do you think of it? And they taste it and they think, it's really not what I had in mind. I would give this maybe a 5 out of 10 points, but how about a little lettuce and tomato on here? So you go back, you build a hamburger with lettuce and tomato, you go back to your user, you say, hey, how do you like this burger? It's not quite what I had in mind. I think I probably would like a little, hey, how about some mustard on this hamburger? And so they go away and they come back, and you can see that it's an iterative process. But at each stage, you're going to find out that what they told you they wanted really wasn't all that they realized they needed until they got your first iteration of the plan. And then they realized, oh, yeah, that's okay. But I had forgotten that it really was probably not going to be enough. I really need this next thing added. And so you're finding out at a deeper and deeper level as you go along what people really needed. And the difference, I think, to me, between the agile and the waterfall method is that in the planning stage in your waterfall situation or scenario, people didn't really know all the implications of what they were going to plan for. They had an idea, but until they could get to the executing place, they didn't know, oh, I really wanted mustard on that hamburger. So in a silly kind of example, that's the difference between agile and waterfall method. So let's just take a closer look. It's a more linear approach, the waterfall method is. You gather and document requirements, you design something, you write computer code, or whoever your software person is going to be doing that, and then you test that, and then you go to your user and you say, how do you like it? And then you fix the issues. A true waterfall development project represents a distinct stage of software development or any kind of project development. And each stage usually finishes before you go to the next one. So you can certainly read a lot more about waterfall method elsewhere. There's some good things about it. And take a minute to just look at some of the good things. People who prefer this method, especially they like to have a straightforward plan and not have a lot of piecemeal tweaks to that plan. They wanted to keep that as a minimum. And notice the sort of in the middle, except for reviews, approvals, and status meeting, a customer presence is not strictly required and after the requirements phase. So really it's technicians getting together and deciding what would work after they've heard what the requirements are for the design of the program or whatever. So those are two real distinct characteristics of the waterfall method. But here's some problems with it. One of the most common places where this falls apart is that the requirements are not really well known. Even if the customer is involved, they may not really realize all that they needed to have told the developers about what it was that was being planned. Customers are sometimes intimidated by details, and it's so they lose interest, or in my case, what I have seen is that nurses and physicians and people who are actually going to be using the program or the whatever it is you're implementing are very busy people, and they don't have time to sit down and dwell on details and scenarios of what if we do it this way, this is what will happen. They're intimidated by sometimes the developers of the technology, and they're just not always able to visualize what it is that that will be the result of all this planning. So there are some drawbacks to the waterfall method. Now, what some people do, in this case, let's just say it's an app that's being developed. You can do some what we call wireframes and mock-ups. A wireframe is where you just have a very scaled down, simple depiction of what the user will see in this program, or in this case, on this app screen. Whereas a mock-up has got a lot more detail and would be a lot easier for somebody to see how this would actually work in their environment. So you may hear the words wireframe and mock-up. Timer here, making sure. So with the more detail they can see, for example, in a mock-up, the more likely they are to give you some true feedback on how well this is going to fit into their workflow and so forth. Another potential drawback for the waterfall development is that when all is said and done, the customer's dissatisfied with this. And once you have developed the software and you've developed all the interface and you've developed all the program, you've put a lot of money and time into it, and they say, well, that's just not really what I had in mind. Remember that hamburger that we started out and then we said we wanted a hamburger and it was 2 pieces of bread and a piece of meat. But really what we needed was 2 pieces of bread, some meat, some mustard, some lettuce, tomato, maybe some onion, a little bacon. If you're here in the United States, let's put some cheese on it. And what they got was not what they really were expecting. A customer in the waterfall method may not see what will actually be delivered until it's almost finished. And by that time, changes can be difficult and costly to implement. So there's some really good things about waterfall method, and there's some really big drawbacks to the method. Now let's talk about the agile method. It's a time-based approach, team-based approach, emphasizes a rapid delivery of an application. I think these are probably, we need to move on and show you an example, a video of an example of one to give you a little bit better idea of what is meant by time-boxed and sprints. In an agile approach, you have very short time frames for solving a problem, and that little time frame is called a sprint, and it's never more than a couple of weeks. And you're just biting off a little bit of the program and testing that to see if you've got the right idea of what the customer needed, so that you can go back and modify that if need be. As the work is completed in these little sprints, the customer has a chance to review what's done and to evaluate it. Now, here's the key to making this successful. The project team, the people actually doing some of the work, they can't do all of it. They can't do some of probably the software coding and that sort of thing, but they're on the team and they can do their part, but they are the end user as well. So every project team has an end user on it, at least one, so that the customer, the person who knows the most about what this new program or this new process needs to do, is involved at every step of the way. And that is critical to the agile method. There's some advantages here. The customer has frequent and early opportunities to see the work. Take a moment to look at a few of those. I think the key to me is that the development is more user-focused rather than technically focused. And the negotiation for why we have to do it this way, perhaps to save some money, is not made by people who don't have to actually use the actual program or the actual process. And the agile approach is you can usually get a basic version working much earlier in the process. Remember I said what a wireframe and a mock-up look like. It's very important that somebody sees early on what the interface will look like, what the person who's going to enter data or the person who's got to get data out of the system is going to be seeing, because it's without that kind of real awareness, they really can't do that planning ahead of time. They have to see it. They have to taste the burger before they know it's not what they really needed. Let's see a video here that might talk about, might make this a little clearer. Let's see if it's gonna take its time in getting up and going.
I recently read the book Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. In it, author Jeff Sutherland explains a powerful project management system called Scrum. Scrum combats the major problems with most projects. The biggest problem with projects is that they try to estimate the entire project in one shot at the beginning of the project. This estimate is overly detailed, it takes weeks to produce, and the actual team who's going to do the work aren't typically involved. Afterwards, management thinks that this plan is perfect. All we need to do for the project to be successful is just stick to the plan. There is a fundamental problem with this method of estimating a project, and it stems from what psychologists call cognitive biases. A cognitive bias is a tendency to think irrationally, to use bad judgment. Cognitive biases are fundamental flaws of human rationale, and they've been present with us for thousands of years, and we oftentimes are not even aware of them. The first one that we fall prey to when planning a project is the planning fallacy. The planning fallacy was first discovered in 1979 by Daniel Kahneman. The planning fallacy is the tendency to underestimate the time it takes to complete a project, simply because we vastly underestimate all the influential factors. We tend to be overly optimistic and underestimate a project even if we're aware of this phenomenon. Author Jeff Sutherland has seen this in many projects. He finds that estimates of work can range from 400% beyond the time actually taken to 25% of the time taken. The second combination of cognitive biases we fall prey to is the sunk cost and status quo bias. When we spend a lot of time or invest a lot of money creating something, we become attached to it. We resist any change and all new information that might contradict our work. This leads to a delayed response to new information and eventually project overruns. Thankfully, there is a better way, and the better way is called the Scrum method. The Scrum method is characterized by doing planning in small chunks, to plan throughout the project and to actively seek to improve upon the plan. Major companies are adopting the Scrum method. Google, Amazon, Salesforce, and the FBI all use the Scrum method. The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. Author Jeff Sutherland states that Scrum has its origins in the world of software development, but now it's sweeping through myriad other places where work gets done. Everything from building a rocket ship to managing payroll to journalism. Scrum accelerates effort.
Got a problem here.
It doesn't
with this
matter
video.
what that
Just a
effort
second.
is.
Let me see if I can fix that.
On a typical Scrum project, you only see teams that are between 3 and 9 people. A team beyond 9 people cannot communicate effectively. Powerful project management system called Scrum. Scrum combats the major problems with most projects. The biggest problem with projects is that they...
All right, let's make sure that this is sharing.
I recently read the book Scrum, I recently read the book Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. In it, author Jeff Sutherland explains a powerful project management system called Scrum. Scrum combats the major problems with most projects. The biggest problem with projects is that they try to estimate the entire project in one shot at the beginning of the project. This estimate is overly detailed. It takes weeks to produce, and the actual team who's going to do the work aren't typically involved. Afterwards, management thinks that this plan is perfect. All we need to do for the project to be successful is just stick to the plan. There is a fundamental problem with this method of estimating a project, and it stems from what psychologists call cognitive biases. A cognitive bias is a tendency to think irrationally, to use bad judgment. Cognitive biases are fundamental flaws of human rationale, and they've been present with us for thousands of years, and we oftentimes are not even aware of them. The first one that we fall prey to when planning a project is the planning fallacy. The planning fallacy was first discovered in 1979 by Daniel Kahneman. The planning fallacy is the tendency to underestimate the time it takes to complete a project, simply because we vastly underestimate all the influential factors. We tend to be overly optimistic and underestimate a project even if we're aware of this phenomenon. Author Jeff Sutherland has seen this in many projects. He finds that estimates of work can range from 400% beyond the time actually taken to 25% of the time taken. The second combination of cognitive biases we fall prey to is the sunk cost and status quo bias. When we spend a lot of time or invest a lot of money creating something, we become attached to it. We resist any change and all new information that might contradict our work. This leads to a delayed response to new information and eventually project overruns. Thankfully, there is a better way, and the better way is called the Scrum method. The Scrum method is characterized by doing planning in small chunks, to plan throughout the project and to actively seek to improve upon the plan. Major companies are adopting the Scrum method. Google, Amazon, Salesforce, and the FBI all use the Scrum method to complete projects. Author Jeff Sutherland states that Scrum has its origins in the world of software development, but now it's sweeping through myriad other places where work gets done, everything from building a rocket ship to managing payroll to journalism. Scrum accelerates effort. It doesn't matter what that effort is. On a typical Scrum project, you only see teams that are between 3 and 9 people. A team beyond 9 people cannot communicate effectively. This team is responsible for estimating the work. The people that do the work estimate the work. The team completes work in short work sprints, and they aim to demo their work at the end of the work sprints to validate their work and gather feedback. Here are the 7 steps of every Scrum sprint. Step number 1, populate a backlog of all the things you need to do on the project. Don't make it very detailed. Just list all the items you need to complete on the project. Put them in story format. Each task should read like a narrative. Who needs it? What specifically do they need? And why do they need it? What are they going to use it for? This makes the task easier to read, and you can hand a task off to anyone, and they can start off without a lot of explanation. During this first step, you also prioritize the backlog, and you do it in terms of the customer value and the immediate impact that each task will have upon completion. If it's going to generate revenue right away, then that item should be near the top. This first step is done by the product owner, who is the visionary for the project's outcome. The second step is to estimate each of these tasks relatively by using the Fibonacci sequence. Use the Fibonacci sequence because it's easier to distinguish between numbers like 5 and 8 as compared to 4 and 5. Humans are great at telling the difference between 1, 2, and 3, but beyond that, it just seems like many. Author Jeff Sutherland states that don't estimate in absolute terms like ours. It's been proven that humans are terrible at that. Size things relatively, like t-shirt sizes, small, medium, extra large, or more commonly, the Fibonacci sequence. The Fibonacci sequence is very common in nature, so humans are very used to it. They've been used to it for thousands of years. To apply your relative estimate, start with the hardest, longest item. Apply the top end of your Fibonacci sequence range. So for this case, it would be 13. And then estimate all other items relative to the hardest item. Step number 3, plan your work sprint. Work sprints are typically 1 to 2 weeks long. They all must be less than 1 month long. And the goal is to get to a demo date at the end of the work sprint. So you have to determine how many of these points that you've assigned to tasks you can complete before the end of the sprint. Let's say for this sprint, we could do 108 points. It's an educated guess. After the first sprint, you realize that you only completed 96 points. You now use this 96 points as a baseline for future sprints. I like to try and improve upon the initial point value by 10% for all successive sprints. Step number 4 is to make your work visible. You do this by creating a Scrum storyboard. A simple storyboard includes 3 columns: what you're going to do, what you're doing, and what you've done for the sprint. So we populate the do column. If this was on the wall, you would use post-it notes, and each post-it note would represent a task. As you start doing it, you move it to the doing column, and as you complete it, you move it to the done column. Each day, you update what's called a burn down chart. The burn down chart is simply a chart that has an initial sprint point value on the y-axis, and you want to subtract from that initial point value each day to, at the end of the sprint, hopefully be down to 0 points remaining. Step number 5 of a Scrum sprint is to do daily 15-minute stand-up meetings. During these meetings, you ask, what did we do yesterday? What do we plan to do today? And what obstacles are slowing us down? How can we make improvements? This discussion is led by the Scrum leader, who's the facilitator for the team. Step number 6, at the end of your sprint, you demo your minimal viable product. It's a product that has a working feature, not a complete product, but something that you can demonstrate. During the demonstration, you get feedback from the user, from the customer. The customer will let you know if they approve the feature, or they'll tell you to improve it. The final step of a Scrum sprint is to get your team together and go over what went well last sprint, what didn't go well, and what improvements can we make to the next sprint. After you've identified the things you can improve upon, you start the next sprint, going back to step 1. Now, why is Scrum so powerful? Why is it so much better than existing project management methods, other than just the original estimate phase? There are 3 core reasons. The first is that on Scrum projects, you improve exponentially. Because you're having daily stand-up meetings, and because at the end of each sprint, you need to get feedback and further improve the way you're doing work. These process improvements compound on one another, like compounding interest. And eventually, they grow to be massive changes. This is why you can do twice the work in half the time. The second core reason Scrum is better than most projects is that it follows the 80-20 principle. The 80-20 principle states that 80% of the value will come from 20% of the effort or time on a project. Therefore, if we look at each sprint as the initial 20% of every project, we can in a sense get 80% of the value out of every sprint that we take. This can lead to a huge value return, far greater than what was initially expected. The final core reason why Scrum is better than most projects is that the sprints in a Scrum are a constraint for your work hours. A typical project requires that you put in some extra hours due to the fact that you aren't getting the feedback fast enough and you need to catch up. When you work more hours, your decision quality goes down. As your decision quality goes down, your rework goes up, which results in more work for the project, which results in more hours and to poorer decisions. It's a downward death spiral for your project. So there you have it. That's why Scrum kicks ass. If you would like a handy one-page Scrum Sprint checklist PDF, just click the link below and I'd be happy to email it to you. Thanks for listening and have a productive day. I recently read the book.
Now, obviously, that was the sales pitch for the Scrum book and for the idea as a whole. But it definitely has been used seriously by people, not just designing software, but any kind of project can use the principles and processes of a Scrum project management endeavor. And I found this for you that you may find useful. You can go to the URL on this slide and download the Scrum guide in Lithuanian, and I urge you to do that and to look at it as perhaps a way to handle your next project, whether it's say a project you're doing for class or whether it's something in your work environment, to take that idea of small deliverable chunks of the project and try to apply some of these principles, because they really do work. I've used them in community planning in another country. It's just a really interesting and kind of fun way of getting your work done. And I think it really does help to cut down on the reworking of a project, the starting out, making a really solid plan, which then when it starts to be implemented, has flaws in it that have to be reworked, but then there's that resistance. So I really liked my plan. It's too late to rework it now if you've gone with the waterfall type method. So I hope you enjoy that kind of thought-provoking new way to do work. Now, there are, of course, some disadvantages to this kind of work as well. You've got a lot of customer involvement, and as I said earlier, your customer, who in your case may be staff, simply don't have the time or the interest to get that involved in some new project. They may start out enthusiastic, but then there's not, at least in my experience, not just one project at a time that needs their attention. There are usually multiple projects that are pulling them in all directions. Agile kinds of processes like Scrum work best when everybody's dedicated to the project and so forth. So let you take a second to read a few more of those. And even agile methods have that notion of getting close to the end and finding out, whoops, there's something that people weren't aware of or didn't think to tell me about that will cause this problem, this new whatever it is, process or project not to work as well as I thought. Now, let's talk about another important part. Let's say you've done your project management, you've done Scrum, and you've got this great idea for something, and you need to roll it out. There's some strategies for rollouts that you need to keep in mind, and let's talk about what those are. Training. Training is important. You needed to train people who were on the Scrum team. You need to train people how to use the demos. You need to train all along the way. You need to train, and more train. You need to remember that when you're doing your training, just in time, kinds of processes can be rolled out, and then you can train how to use that. Some people don't want to know the whole thing. Like, take it, the electronic health record. They don't want to know how to do every part of it. They just want to know how to do their part of it. Some people do well in classroom, like you're doing. Some people would rather learn self-paced. They don't want to sit down and be talked to. They want to get out and try some things and then come back and gain new information, then go try that. Some people like to be in a group in their training. Others don't want to be in a group. They just want to get one-to-one kind of training. And certainly in hospitals, you have the problem of different schedules. You can't have all training take place during the daytime. Some of it needs to be at night and on the weekend. Not everybody's equally skilled at doing the training. And so some people do well in classroom training, but don't do so well in sort of hands-on kind of training situations, or vice versa. So think about all the different ways that people learn and all the different people who can navigate those ways. Even more training issues. Convenient locations. You need a focused curriculum so that people are learning what they need to know, when they need to know it. And training starts early and continues through the operational stage and beyond. As I said before, I've seen excellent programs fail a few months after the program was implemented, because in that time period where it was rolled out and people were using it, new projects surfaced that took the attention away from the first project. And so it just sort of languished and then deteriorated, and there was nobody to keep it up because everybody was having to learn a new program every few months. And that is part of the way that programs fail. So there's three kinds of ways that people do rollout. One we call the Big Bang. And that is, you've got an old system, or maybe it's a new document on the EHR, or maybe it's a total new, in some kind of whole new piece of equipment. You use your old system while you're planning, and as soon as you get your program ready to roll out, you immediately stop using the old system and bring in the new one. And that's called the Big Bang. Versus, here's another way of phasing it in. You use your old system for a while, and then you introduce some little part of the new system. And then you increase the amount of the old, you increase the amount of the new system. And then you get to where you've sort of phased out the old, and you're now using nothing but the new system. And some people try that. It takes more time, obviously, and there's confusion related to that. We'll talk about that in a second. And then you've got parallel, where for a while, people are having to use both the old system and the new system. So they're either doing double documentation until they get comfortable with the new system, and then they've phased out the old. So there's some commonalities across these and some differences across them, but it's important to think about this and decide what the implications are for which way you want to go. Sometimes the Big Bang is preferable. You get all the pain over at once until people are up and running on the new, but they're not still dependent on the old. But there are some real benefits in learning gradually how to let go of the old and use the new. We say that the Big Bang is like ripping off the Band-Aid. Take a minute to see the differences between those, or sorry, the pros and the cons between them about the Big Bang. When you roll something out all at once and it fails in some way, you're going to have a lot of problems with people trusting that the new way, after that failed process is fixed, that new way is going to be something they want to get involved in and put their time and energy into learning. So there are some definite drawbacks to the Big Bang, but there are also some definite drawbacks to the phased rollout. So take a minute to look at those. The phase rollout change is going on constantly. You're letting go of the old and taking on more of the new, and sometimes that's disruptive. It increases the stress for the people who are using the system. So it's got some pros for sure, because it isn't a sink or swim kind of thing. You get a little time to learn the new system before you've let go of the old, but not without some drawbacks as well. All right, so then there's parallel adoption. It's where you're using both at the same time there for a while. So take a look and see what the pros and cons for that process are. Certainly it's the least risky, because if you're not doing well in the old system, you've still got or in the new system, you've still got the old system to rely on. But it is also the most expensive, because you're running two processes, and that means two times the amount of energy that the user has to put into it and so forth. So it can be expensive both in financial terms, but also in the time of the user having to learn and use both of those systems at the same time. And that doesn't scale up very well. In other words, it might work for one unit in one hospital, but when you're going to have all hospitals in the entire country taking on this new process, this system works not so well. All right, let's just briefly talk about user evaluation. We'll talk more about evaluation certainly tomorrow, or the next class period. Can't emphasize this enough. There's strong evidence to suggest that for health information technology products, the product is less important than how well the product gets implemented. And by product, it could be a new form, or it could be a new piece of software, or a new piece of equipment. But the product itself is less important than the strategies used to implement it, whether that's the planning for implementation, the training, the support during implementation. All of that is so important. You can do a great job with the hardware, software, and the technology, but that isn't going to mean that the people who need it are going to use it the way it needs to be used. The product doesn't matter if the users do not use the system or don't use it as it was intended. And that's where your workarounds come around. I think of one example that when I done research and seen that we went to barcodes on wristbands in the hospital, so the nurse could read the barcode before she or he distributed the medication to that patient. And that was time consuming, because the patient had to fiddle around with their barcode bracelet and then show it to the nurse, who had to use the reader. And so the nurses started getting duplicate barcodes and putting them on a clipboard that they carried into the room. And so as they got into the room, they just scanned the barcode they assumed went with that patient so that they could quickly and efficiently distribute the medicine. So it was a great idea to have these barcodes. It was a safety feature. It was an informatics triumph. To the planners, it would make it impossible then for the nurse to give the wrong medicine or the medicine to the wrong patient. But the nurses found it so tedious to use and had not been trained on its importance that the workaround they invented for themselves completely undid any benefit that that system could have had in reducing medication errors. And again, stressing the same thing I said earlier, all users and stakeholders need to be involved from the very beginning if this is going to be successful as a change in either the electronic health record or any other kind of information system or accompanying quality improvement initiative. Any of those things require all users and stakeholders be significantly involved, not just informed about what's about to happen, but involved in creating what's about to happen. Now, those of us who love data need to be reminded constantly of the fact that while anecdotal evidence, in other words, what people are saying in around their mealtime when they're sitting around talking and about what has just been introduced as a new innovation, that's anecdotal evidence, and it's not scientific, but it may be one of the best ways to spot problems early and to reinforce the goal of the new program or the new piece of equipment. And it's a way to recognize staff members for their efforts. It's good to involve all the organization's leadership and have them visible during and after implementation so they can listen to what people say. And there are anecdotal assessment tools that are useful, which is just tell me, you're asking staff or users to just tell you what their experience has been and then listen to that, because it is those kinds of pieces of information, while they are not electronic always, are very valuable. And the notion of management and leadership walking around both before, during, and after implementation and talking and listening to the people who will be the users, critically important. Here's though another way that is a little, I guess you could say, hard data, not anecdotal, but it's a survey, and there are many, many of these that are ways that users can give you feedback on the quality of whatever. This happens to be an electronic health record, either a change in one or a brand new one. And you're asking the user to tell you, did it increase overall efficiency? Because it may have increased efficiency in one area, but caused a burden in another. So really you want to know what was the net effect and the gross effect of your change. Are the reminders and alerts in an electronic health record annoying? If they are annoying, they will be ignored or worked around by the user. So the interface, the person who's using whatever this is that you're implementing, if they don't find it really user-friendly, they will not use it the way you think it is intended to be used or that you imagine that they are using it. You can ask your user, after the initial learning curve, my personal productivity has returned to normal or improved. Sure, it's going to be difficult at first and not feel natural to use something new. But after a period of time, it either my efficiency and productivity should return to normal or improve, or I am not going to use this the way that it is intended to be used. So take a minute and look at the rest of those. Now, actually, this is a slide that when I test all the slides, and I'm sorry I didn't take this one out because I went to both of these links and neither of them worked. So what I had done was to search the toolkits for evaluating health informatics. I will get you some more up to date, and I'm sorry I didn't realize that I didn't take that slide out. But one really good resource is this Stratus Health. You can just Google that and find all these resources for assessing information technology. And I think you'll find them really helpful. And the link there is at the bottom. Now, we're about at the end of the slides. I want to say that my students use this textbook, Mastering Informatics, for a couple of reasons. It was put out, it was published by Sigma Theta Tau International, and that is a very credible organization. It has a lot of good information for beginning users of informatics, leadership, and actual users. But a real benefit to it is that it's US dollars, $59.95, but purchasing this textbook will allow you also to get a significant reduction in the price of getting continuing nursing education. And that's important because that CNE, that nursing education, can be required for nursing informatics certification exam. So all that is to say, if you're thinking about getting certified as a nurse informaticist, one way to navigate that system is through purchasing this textbook, then doing the continuing education that's required, and then taking the exam. So you can certainly take a look at that and see if that's of interest to you. Now, in the next hour and a half, you all are going to be discussing the competencies of that are required of a nurse leader who's involved in informatics, and then discussing your own plans and your own future dreams and goals for how you're going to work with informatics as a leader in nursing. So we've gone a little bit over time, but not much. I appreciate your attention. There are further resources on the Moodle site, and I will be available during this next hour and a half as you all are working your way through the discussion questions about competency and about certification. So thanks for your attention. And this slide video will be on the Moodle site as well, so you can go back and view it as many times as you want. See you soon. Bye.